I commend it to the House.
Question Auntie Lole-Taylor.
I rise on behalf of this, yes, a very nice blue, just to remind people on the other side who the real traditional national party is. I rise on behalf of New Zealand First Party, the party who takes pride in its common sense, realistic approach towards social services policies. In fact, the Minister would do well to seek quality advice from the New Zealand First, and we are happy to offer that advice. I am somehow stunned by the former speaker's poor contribution to this debate. Screaming to the mic does not necessarily represent quality, I must say. Let's be real here. The aim of this bill was to transform the benefit system into one that is modern, active, and work-focused for adults, and education-focused for young people. And yes, Mr. Lotu-Iiga, yes, New Zealand First continues to ask the question of where are the jobs? Where are the jobs at the end of the day? And has the government received funding from Australia federal government for these proposed training programs? Because we can be sure they will be benefiting from them. Our tertiary students at present are already on one-way tickets across the ditch and to other parts of Europe and Asia, while the government shows no intention of holding on to them at all. Instead, the Minister proposes to boost a growing exodus. In fact, New Zealand is becoming an excellent employment agency, or shall we say, training institution for Australia, and perhaps we should ask Australia to thank New Zealand national government for doing this. I recall, let me remind you, Mr. Mike Sabin, I recall the former Prime Minister of the national government who once said that New Zealanders who immigrate to Australia raise the IQ of both countries. Sadly, nowadays, it has raised the IQ of only Australia and other countries, but New Zealand. Pushing this bill forward suggests a speedy implementation of legislation that hopefully does not come under close scrutiny. Yes, we believe that reducing long-term welfare dependency is something that this government needs to address. We acknowledge that. But where within these schemes provide the solutions? Where is the question? I can tell everyone in this House and those who are listening to this debate now what this is a solution to. This bill is merely a concealment. It is this government's disguise of a job creation scheme for bureaucracy. In other words, sugarcoating, which is probably the more relevant term. That's right, Mr. Tim McIndoe. New Zealand First is concerned about a number of changes proposed in this bill. These include the use of the private sector in finding jobs, information sharing provisions within the bill, wider welfare reform package, and of course the cost to the taxpayer. Furthermore, we see the bill as a distraction from the government's poor economic management and its failure to provide the right settings for job creation. That's right. Thank you. I agree with you, and thank you for agreeing with me. Looking at the current benefits youth have access to, namely the independent youth benefit, I see the same expectation laid out for 16 to 17-year-olds. The same obligations to be met regarding secondary schooling, full-time training, and activeness in looking for work. I see exactly the same framework surrounding a youth benefit, but with a difference in being its title and openings for yet again political chronism. If we look at this bill from its intent on stating the obvious, it exceeds all levels. You can laugh about it, Mr. Lotu-Iiga, but we have debated this at Select Committee and we have made our view pretty clear. Yes, it has outlined that better parenting education programs and budgeting programs are needed for young parents. But where are your figures to say how much this is going to cost New Zealand taxpayers? Where are the figures? What we don't want is a transfer of beneficial funds ending up in the pockets of privateers.
Order. Point of order.
I can help this new, inexperienced member with the figures.
No.
Quite happy to...
No. You're interrupting a member's speech. Asanati Lole-Taylor.
Thank you. Yeah, I can also sympathise with that member because he perhaps needs a little bit more education of when to stand up and call a point of order. The benefit system should actively help and promote paid work and independence, not creating barriers to finding paid work. As my colleague Barbara Stewart actually once said, my colleague, are you listening, Tim McIndoe? Are you listening? I'm trying to remind you of what was discussed in the select committee, just in case you got a memory problem there. As my colleague Barbara Stewart stated in his speech, and I quote, Barbara Stewart quoted that the New Zealand Treasury has provided forecasts for jobs to increase by 1.6% per annum in the next 3 years. She made that very clear. The question, though, is that what sort of jobs are we talking about here? What sort of jobs? Since the government's deceived its voters into believing jobs would be available, and now there's been more jobs losses. I can only infer that this forecast is based on optimism, which is far different from reality. The proposed information sharing section screens nanny states, which the national government have actually accused the Labour of doing. This bill permits certain agencies, and I quote from the bill, permits certain agencies to disclose information about young persons in certain circumstances. Who then decides which relevant agencies have access? Well, definitely can't imagine Lotu-Iiga to be somebody that can give that. Who are these intended agencies, or can I say buddies, and what are the certain circumstances? Under the new section 125D, there is no explanation given as to which organisation will have accessibility rights and which individuals will have their information shared. We find no problem with the Department of Education providing information to the Ministry of Social Development. That's absolutely fine. This is with reference to the provision relating to the use of the national student number. We recognise that. With respect to the provision relating to the use of the national student number, though, we will support the inclusion of a specific provision concerning information sharing between the Department of Education and the Ministry of Social Development. We agree, however, with the Privacy Commissioner that the changes in this bill target a group for whom trust in authority may already be in short supply. And that's very important to actually note. Modern society norms is what this government wants to align its models with. Really? Is it normal to ask the widows and women living alone to take on board work without taking into consideration their circumstances? Is the minister saying that the norm of this government is to be insensitive to these women and widows? Yes, I believe so. Women, for as long as we can remember, have always had an important role in our community, in our families. For women alone in their 50-plus age, where do they propose these women will find jobs? It is hard enough for youth to find jobs. And what say you, Mr. Speaker, the older generation's prospect in this competitive job market? New Zealand First opposed this bill, and the reason why we oppose is because it does not make sense. New Zealand First said from its very beginning that we will support good legislation and oppose bad legislation. If the intent of this bill had actually served purpose on reducing welfare dependency and had given real solution to this problem, we may have we may have a differing stance. However, for these legitimate reasons, New Zealand First will not support the amendment bill in its second reading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Tim McIndoe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I